Hey Terror Addicts, welcome to Night Terrors, delivering your favorite scary stories every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. So if you're addicted to terror, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe. And now, let the terror begin. My breath misted in the air as the unseasonably cold chill hung around me. I looked at the forest, once a place of fun and laughter, now dark and sinister in the moonlight, branches stretching and contorting towards me like the sky had skeletal fingers. That thing had Jess, and I couldn't live with myself if I didn't do anything about it. After all, it was my fault for leaving her alone out there. I swallowed back the lump in my throat and began tenaciously walking down the road towards the woods. Don't worry, Jess, I thought. I'm coming. As I entered the woods, I immediately began to question my actions. I knew that what I was doing was not smart by any stretch of imagination, that my foolhardiness could very well get me killed. The thought of bumping into the creature out here, alone in the dark, was more terrifying than anything I could ever imagine, and knowing that Jess was in that very situation herself was the only thing that drove me on. I trudged on the familiar old trail for about 20 minutes or so until I eventually came to the creek. I'd never been here before in the dark, and although everything was still as it should be, it looked different. It was as if these were my woods to play in during the day, but now in the dark, it was an alien place. This was its domain. I was a stranger here, unwelcome. This feeling was reinforced by the fact that I had no idea what lay beyond the creek, except from what I'd seen in the immediate area from the other side. Carefully, I crossed the creek, the water soaking through my boots and dampening my trouser legs. As soon as I'd stepped out onto the other side, I felt like I was lost. How would I find my way back? Which direction would I go in? I ignored the first question. I had bigger things to worry about at the moment, and decided to head off in the direction I'd last seen the creature going. I started walking, vigilant for any signs of movement or noise. I'd expected there to be animals out this late at night, but eerily it was silent, which made me feel even more vulnerable. Every footstep sounded like an alarm, telling the creature where I was. I stopped for a moment and looked around with my flashlight. I felt like the darkness was swallowing me, that the thing had just sat outside the borders of light, laughing at the efforts to find it. I realized that if there was anything out there, the light would only serve to give away my position, effectively ending any kind of advantage. After a pause, I switched off the flashlight and waited for my eyes to adjust. It was difficult at first, but after a few minutes, I could make out enough of the forest to start slowly making my way through it. It was about 10 minutes later when I heard it, a short, sharp yelp to my left in the distance. I paused and waited to see if any other noise was made. A moment later, a snap echoed through the darkness and a dull thump. I was not alone anymore. Swallowing fear, I sunk into my haunches and slowly made my way toward this noise. I had plenty of experience of being quiet from the rabbit game, and even in the dark I didn't find it too hard to distribute weight so as to move silently. After a while I reached a clearing where the trees parted in a grassy patch about half the size of a football field. In the center of the clearing was a rocky depression that sunk down into the earth. I was about to make my way over to investigate it when I saw it. It was standing near the edge of a clearing to the south and was slowly limping its way over to the depression, dragging something behind it. In the dark, I couldn't make out what it was, but it was about the size of a child, except if the child had been snapped in the middle. It flapped limply with every bounce like a paper fan. I swallowed a lump and tears stung my eyes. I wasn't sure if I was more scared or sad. I prayed to God to not let that be Jess and continued to watch it as it reached the pit and then hurled the object over the edge of the rim. It hit the ground with the unmistakable sound of crunching bone. The creature bent down headfirst as if to crawl into the rocks and then stopped. Slowly it stood back up and sniffed. I instinctively pressed my back to the tree, removing myself from view and strained to listen. I heard it sniff again softly and walk around in what sounded like a small circle, and then nothing. I waited for what seemed like eternity, and then I waited some more. I was unbearingly tense, expecting to see its milky eyes slowly peer around the side of the tree, followed by that big crooked smile at any second, or a long hooked finger to slide out of the darkness and rest itself on my shoulder. Nothing happened, though, and nothing continued to happen for the next couple of minutes. Gathering my courage, I hesitantly glanced around the trunk only to see the clearing was empty. I double, triple, and quadruple checked the area before making sure it was gone, and then I stepped out back to the clearing edge, making sure to keep low to the ground. To step out into the clearing was out of the question. Suicidal. What if it was only hiding in the clearing edge itself, or waiting in the rocky fissure of the center? It would defy all logic, rebel against every survival instinct, and yet I had to know. I'd come here looking for Jess. If I turned back now without checking to see if it was her, crumpled and contorted at the bottom of those rocks, then I may never know. The sheriff was right. The not knowing was the worst part. Before I stepped out, I pulled the magnum out from my waistband and cocked the hammer back, being careful to mute the click by smothering it between my legs. When it was loaded and ready to fire, I began to slowly inch my way out of the safety of the tree line and into the open. I took a few steps and then stopped, waiting to see if anything came crashing towards me. When nothing did, I continued my cautious journey to the depression. When I reached the lip, I aimed the gun ahead of me and looked over. It was a couple feet deep, about 10 or so. It was a little larger than I'd expected. One side of the hole was hollow and extended to the ground as a sort of cave, large enough to drive a car through. At the mouth of the cave was the body, slumped over a jagged rock. I glanced around again, making sure I wasn't being snuck up on, and started to lower myself down. I would just need a quick glance to make sure it wasn't, or was Jess. And then I'd leave, run back to Fenter. I'd wake my dad and the others, lead them here, and we'll kill it. In this cave, that was surely its dwelling. It could be in there right now, watching me struggle to get down the smooth rock. But I reasoned that if it was in the cave, then there was nothing I could do about it. I must be crazy. Fears consume my brain so completely that I'm not able to feel anything anymore, I thought. This was proven wrong when I slipped and fell off the side of the rock, landing awkwardly and sending pain shooting down to my ankle. I almost cursed aloud but bit down on my lip and shouted silently in my head. Luckily it wasn't twisted, just achy, and I was able to walk on it without any problem. The last thing I needed now was a broken foot. My thoughts were so preoccupied with the sudden pain that I'd forgotten I was now right next to the cadaver. My leg bumped against it. I spun the gun around, ready and almost firing it off into the rocks.